Hello everyone, it's time to do the monthly movie mash for May, the list of what else I saw last month that I didn't get to do a review of, and we're gonna jump right into it, starting at number 1 with Caltiki the Immortal Monster, a horror flick from 1959 that I thought was surprisingly good. It's an Italian film, original title Caltiki il mostro immortale. I don't speak Italian, is it obvious? Italian made, filmed in Spain, set in Mexico, starring John Merivale, a Canadian-born British actor speaking English dubbed into Italian. We watched it on Amazon Prime with subtitles. It's a story about an archaeological expedition among Mayan ruins that uncovers an ancient blob-like organism that goes on the attack and grows to tremendous size. Think the Blob, except black and white, and maybe with an ancient curse attached to it. Oh, and it can multiply, which leads to a pretty awesome climax. The whys and wherefores aren't so terribly important. I came more for the atmosphere and the thrills, which were quite fun, and there were parts that reminded me of the old Universal horror films, the Mummy sequels in particular. It's the visual effects that are the big draw, I'd say. Not that they're state-of-the-art, as you can tell looking at these images. They are pretty low budget, but they're impressive and creepy for what I am assuming was a low-budget movie. Those close-up shots of people getting consumed by Caltiki must have been shocking stuff in 1959. They were shocking stuff for me in 2019. The next one was actually a rewatch of a movie that I saw for the first time probably 10 years ago, 1958's Run Silent, Run Deep, which is considered one of the best old black and white World War II sub-movies. Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster face off here, Gable as the new commander and Lancaster as the XO who expected to be given the command. Gable is too busy seeking revenge on the Japanese ship that sank his previous sub to try to endear himself to a crew that's already loyal to Lancaster, and he keeps his personal objective a secret while steering the boat into extremely dangerous waters. It's the tension between the two men that really makes the movie, with the actual hunt for the Japanese ship at times taking a back seat to the passive-aggressive antagonism between them. Lancaster opposes Gable with a polite hostility that's somehow more biting than open dislike and disregard for authority would be, yet they also can't help acknowledging that they're both good at what they do, even when they're in disagreement. If you like submarine war movies, make sure you check this one off your list. Movie number 3 is the 1948 Howard Hawks western, Red River, which stars John Wayne as a ruthless rancher and Montgomery Clift as his adopted son, who ends up clashing with him on a long cattle drive. This is one of those really famous old westerns, but it didn't grab me as much as I'd hoped it would. It felt a little lengthy, especially when the whole movie was building up to something that was over surprisingly fast, and considering how dire the impending threat seemed to be, there were certain parts that felt a little silly by comparison. But the movie definitely captures the sweep of the old western, and the casting is interesting, with Wayne taking on one of his first sort of antagonist roles, and Montgomery Clift, who I don't think of in connection with westerns at all, playing the young hero in his second film, the first to be released to the public. It also has supporting roles for regular Wayne co-stars Walter Brennan, Harry Carey Sr., and Harry Carey Jr. Coincidentally, this is not by design. This is the second John Wayne, Harry Carey Sr. movie I've seen in the last couple months, the first one being Angel and the Bad Man, which I reviewed last time, or maybe the time before last time. I'm not familiar with Harry Carey Sr., but I liked him in both movies. Movie number 4 is 1957's 0 Hour, which has the misfortune of going down in history as the movie that 1980's Airplane spoofs, sometimes word for word. I say it's a misfortune because, at least in my opinion, 0 Hour on its own isn't such a bad movie, but because it was so outrageously parodied, most people who watch it nowadays probably do so with Airplane in mind, and can't help looking at it from a mocking perspective. All the more so because in this movie, everything is played completely straight. Dana Andrews, who is a frequent guest star in these What Else I Saw videos, does a good job delivering a convincing performance as the troubled ex-pilot of fighter planes who has to fly and land a jetliner in bad weather when the pilots and passengers are struck down with food poisoning. Andrews is working opposite Linda Darnell again, his co-star in 1945's Fallen Angel, another movie that I've already talked about sometime last year, as well as Sterling Hayden. It's up to Andrews to carry most of the movie's tension, which he does capably with that grim determination that characterizes a lot of his roles. The whole thing does have a lower budget feel to it, lots of stock footage, pretty simple sets, but that didn't come as a huge surprise given the time. I don't know, I don't feel like this movie deserved a lot of the derision that was leveled at it in reviews I read. Movie number 5 is a 1946 film called Nocturne, which stars George Raft as a detective investigating the death of a composer who was an incorrigible womanizer who seems to have killed himself or may have been murdered. Wow, this movie turned out to be a lot more fun than the generic crime drama detective story I expected. It's got some witty dialogue that moves very quickly. You've got to pay attention if you want to keep up. It's kind of like The Big Sleep in terms of pacing and sass. It dances into film noir territory at times, including some cinematography that I dare say is on par with more well-known films of the same genre. Plus there were a couple quirky side characters for Raft's detective to interact with, including his mother, who takes an eager interest in his work. For a movie that I never hear anybody talk about, I quite enjoyed this one. Movie number 6 is The FBI Story from 1959, a film about the development of the Federal Bureau of Investigation from its bumpy beginnings to the sophistication of the 50s, told from the perspective of one agent who's been there from the start, played by Jimmy Stewart. Stewart is both a narrator and a participant, taking part in most of the excitement as the FBI goes after the KKK, gangsters, spies, terrorists. It's a good movie, albeit a little long, but it covers a lot of ground, several decades and multiple cases, as well as focusing on the toll the job takes on the agent's loved ones. Vera Miles plays Stewart's beleaguered wife, a few years before they were paired up again in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's definitely a very pro-FBI, pro-government film. There's little to no criticism of the agency, and J. Edgar Hoover, who's portrayed in a favorable light, heartily approved of it. Further political comments I'll refrain from making. I don't talk about politics on YouTube. Movie number 7 is another noirish drama, this one from 1948. It's The Scar, also known as Hollow Triumph. I like The Scar better. Paul Henreid stars, and also worked uncredited behind the camera, I believe, playing a criminal who's hiding out from someone he tried to rob when he comes across his doppelganger, a man who is so much like him that Henry decides to take drastic measures to assume his identity. Now, as someone who finds Paul Henreid very attractive and considers him the epitome of the suave European gentleman, it's not exactly a pleasure to see him being the bad guy. This character is twisted, manipulative, abusive, and oh yeah, he's murderous too. But it's still Paul Henreid. He's still so attractive. Anyway, Henry does a fine job acting the part. I guess he pushed to get the movie made so he could finally get a chance to play a villain. And even though it was confusing to think, he's so dreamy one second, and then see him doing something awful the next, it didn't prevent me liking the movie. It's a tense but relatively short film that retains a feeling of dread throughout as you wonder if and when he's going to get caught. And like Nocturne, there's some really interesting camera work in this one. Framing, movement, creative visuals that help distract from the fact that the plot itself is pretty far-fetched. Still, I'd say this is another good lesser-known noir. Movie number 8 was another rewatch, an unplanned one this time. Apollo 13 was just starting late one night on TV, and we happened to catch it at the beginning. It's one of my mom's favorite movies, so she wanted to stick around and watch it, and I stuck around as well. Apollo 13 is Ron Howard's 1995 award-winning film starring Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Bacon as the three crew members of the Apollo 13 mission who got stranded in space when their craft malfunctioned partway to the moon. My mom loves this movie, has since it first came out. She loves disaster movies and space movies, so yeah, it's perfect for her. But I confess that when I was little, I thought it was long, slow, kinda boring, an impression that stuck for many years. I think I was just too young to grasp the suspense and the drama of what was happening on screen. What I'm able to appreciate, now that I'm so much older and wiser, is that if you pay attention, it's not boring at all. Scientific, evenly paced, serious, dialogue-heavy, and realistic doesn't necessarily equal boring. And for crying out loud, I love survival stories about small groups of people trapped in an isolated setting, and what's more isolated than three individuals marooned in a shuttle in outer space where their oxygen supply is depleting and they have to rely on a team of experts hundreds of thousands of miles away to get them home again. The movie's also a lot more emotional than I remember it being too, with strong personal stories that enrich the plot and give the events unfolding an even deeper significance. That's a lot of good things about a movie that I used to write off as slow and boring. I guess that's an argument for going back and re-watching everything you saw as a child. And movie number 9 is 2002's Below, which is, I guess, a World War II movie, though it doesn't really feel like it. Weird things start to happen on an American sub after it picks up 3 survivors of a torpedoed Red Cross ship. This one was okay. It was marketed as a horror movie, but was more like a mystery, or a ghost story, if that's not saying too much. It was tense, and it had some jump scares, but it wasn't especially scary. Not that I minded that, I don't like to get too scared, but I felt like there was something lacking. It just didn't draw me in. I probably would have liked it better if it was about a sea monster attacking the sub, or an alien getting loose on board, or a hitherto unknown underwater bacteria or virus that starts taking people over or making people sick or something like that. But, oh well. Alright, that's the list of what else I saw in May. I hope you enjoyed the collection this time. There were a lot of old movies on there again. Lots of movies that have been sitting on my personal to-watch list for a long time, so I'm glad to be working my way through those. By the way, I thought I'd also mention that for the last couple months we've been watching The Fugitive. We're taking our time with it, but we're halfway through season 2 and I'm enjoying it. So you can look for a review of that show in, 4 to 6 months. Go ahead and let me know what you thought of any of the movies that I mentioned in the comments down below, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching!